Welcome to the Books on Air podcast. I'm Suzanne Harris, and on our podcast, we talk to the authors about themselves, their books, their inspirations, and their ideas. Every book has two stories, and as my listener, you will find out the secret story behind the book. Joining me today is an amazing man. His name is Timothy Green, and he's here to talk about his book, Open, My Sweet Aroma. Now, it's the third volume of poetry in a trilogy that he's been writing. Timothy, such a pleasure to have you. Welcome to Books on Air. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You know, poets, I've been telling you this while we've been talking off air. Poets hold a very special place in my heart. I just think they see the world in a very different way than a lot of people do. And I'm always intrigued when I have the wonderful opportunity to talk to a poet. Now, your poems are very personal in nature. What inspired you to begin to write poetry in the first place, and how old were you?
Okay, well, I remember being very young at the junior school, the age of 9 or 10, and that was when I started realising that I've got an aptitude for it. But many years later, I was working in the RAF, so that one get pushed aside for a few years. I ended up getting unwell, and that pushed things aside for a few years, and then I picked up the pen while I was in hospital. One chap, he was very good. He helped me out a lot. So he got me starting to pick up the pen again. I must have been about early 30s. I'm 38 now. So it must have been early 30s when I picked up the pen again.
Now, you hand wrote the first group of poems into a notebook. I'm curious, why did you choose to do this by hand instead of computer?
Okay, well, there's a slight charm with written works. I find it very interesting. It's a good outlet, and it just flows better, and it's nice. It's nice because it's new, isn't it? Like, it is old, but it's new because people aren't doing it anymore. So I'm bringing it back.
Well, you are a man after my own heart. I'm the same way. If I'm writing something, there's something about holding that pen and writing on a piece of paper and feeling the words come out of the pen. It's like the connection between your head, the pen, and the paper. There's something sort of magical about it. Yeah, very, very. I loved reading that. When I read that, I thought, I must ask him about why he handwrites. And I hoped that you would give me exactly that answer.
Yeah.
Now, the title of the book is very interesting. Open, My Sweet Aroma. Tell me about that title. Okay.
Well, my second book's called Open. My third book's called My Sweet Aroma. The first two, I had very little money to publish it, so it wasn't edited, and the first two weren't edited, so I decided to bring the first two books into this third book, which is My Sweet Aroma, and I added 70 on top as well. So that was professionally edited, and I'm really, really proud and pleased with the work. The first two, I love them, but there are spelling mistakes and stuff like that that, you know, they do make a difference to the professional quality of the work.
You're right. It does.
Yeah.
And I'm also curious about the cover of the book. I thought the cover was so intriguing. It shows an old-fashioned typewriter, with just the word open. Is there significance to that image?
Absolutely, yeah. It's not just a case of, you know, pick up this book, I've told you to open it, so pick it up. No, it's just a case of being open with people and being open with your beliefs and being open to God as well. So yeah, you can look at that in many different ways. I mean, one word can just mean so much, doesn't it? So,
Yes, it does. Yeah. Now, you classified your poems, as we talked earlier, contemporary Christian. Do you find yourself inspired by God? Is that where your work comes from?
Absolutely, yeah. Me and Lena, my missus, we talk about this, and we agree that it's not my work. I hold the pen, but the Holy Spirit does the rest. So, so most of it's there, and if there are any flaws in it, it's me not totally listening, but I listen very intently to the words that come out onto the paper, sentence to sentence, line to line. I don't know what's coming out next. Whether it's like I can write a line and then I'm thinking, what next? And you write another line and it just goes into it, really. So I haven't got an idea of what I want to write in a poem. It just flows. So it's not any real effort on my part. It's just all I do is write down what was said to me, really. So, yeah.
It's an amazing creative process, isn't it?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a job. I don't call it a job. I don't call it a career because it's just something so much more than that. And if I was to do it for money, I wouldn't make it because there's so much competition and everything. But I write for the pleasure of it, and I write because it's what God wants. He wants to show the world that Christians aren't stuffy and, they don't just go to church and sing happy Christian songs. There's a lot more to it. And there's a lot of artists out there that express themselves in that way, but not totally obvious, so people don't get put off by it.
Have you ever put any of your poems to music?
Oh, me and Jesus, yeah, we talk. We do talk. We do talk. When I write, I'll read it back again, and I think, yeah, this is special. And then, a lot of it's like the inner thoughts that come in. I mean, it's not. I mean, I've spoke to God and everything, but it's not like a big voice in my ear. It's just a little silent part in the back of the head that says, write this or read this or whatever. So it keeps me on my toes, that's for sure. I love doing it, though. It's a brilliant job.
One of the things that I really loved when I was doing my research about you was that you and your partner, your missus, read your poems to each other back and forth aloud. I loved that idea. Does it sound different to you when you hear her read it?
Yeah. When I read it, I get more of an idea of what the poem's about. But when I listen to it, it's a pleasure because you don't have to push so much. So we enjoy doing both. We switch between each other doing it. Normally we read together before we go to bed at night, and it really just settles us down as well, which is nice.
I just really liked that. I'm a loud reader myself. My husband and I don't read poetry, I confess, but we sit there with the old-fashioned newspaper, only it's in electronic form now, and we will read stories and share stories with each other. And you're right. There's something about that listening and sharing that makes whatever it is you're reading different, because you hear it from a different perspective, and so it sounds slightly different than it did in your head.
Right. There's I suppose both ways really, but I believe that you're right, because you do get other ideas of what it's like when you're listening, but you do get other ideas when you're reading. We're pretty good now about what we try to read. We know what doesn't work, like certain poets we don't particularly like. from the others. But yeah, we can pick it up pretty quick whether we can gauge or understand from a poem, whether when it flows. Yeah, so the flow of a poem, very important.
You were inspired by the poetry of Michelangelo. What about Michelangelo's work resonated with you?
Absolutely, yeah. For me, they're pure. It's a pure book. There's nothing indecent in there. There's nothing in there. You can't say, right, that wasn't very nice. Yeah, Michelangelo's work, he was really ahead of his time. He was really ahead of his time, Michelangelo, yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more, yeah.
You know as well.
Let's share some of your poetry with our listeners. Would you read a couple of the poems? And I requested before we started, your missus particularly likes The Swan, and I would like to hear you read it. Yeah, please.
Okay, so this poem's called Guernsey. I like it because it's just so charming. Yeah, okay, so I'll read it. It's called Guernsey. Guernsey, bursting at the seams, such is the air of mystique. Having never explored you, never touched you in my fingers, I shudder to think where you have been. When you bring it all with you, including the kitchen sink, brought into disregard, hard to bear you when all I do is think of you. All the time I think of you. Unwinding and loosening the tap, dripping such as the release of your thoughts. So that one's Guernsey.
Wow. Is that about the Guernsey Islands?
Yeah. It's about a place I've never visited, but I would like to.
Me too. I've never been there as well, and it's fascinating. I agree.
Yeah.
Is there one more you want to read?
There is, yeah. There's plenty in here. So there's a lot of good stuff in here, which is so hard to choose. But I've come to another poem here. It's called His Land. Yeah. Shall I go on?
Please.
Okay. Language, so broad and wide, is what's inside that counts. The humdrum of activity, shortened by the day of age. Every page, word and deed brings us closer to him. Meeting him, oh what a treat, needing his love and strength. His land deters not a soul. Old land sends sands that await not. The world that thinks our saviour would be great world indeed, meeting our kinfolk in need. Breadth and depth sow the seeds. To see brings life and vigour. The time and distance of brilliance take us where we want to be. Certainly awaits using our key. Entrance and deliverance we seek. Brings us a world unknown to them. Beginnings start with a pounding heart. His way we don't betray. No flatteries, radiance stopped. The plot that opens our secrets, not to destroy or make shame, but to agree and make known, lands grown and known to us.
Beautiful.
They are, aren't they?
They are. You have a real talent, Timothy. You really do. I know that we've shared so much about the book. I'm sure that our listeners are saying to themselves, where can we get the book? Obviously, it's on Amazon. So let me give you the title and let me spell Timothy's name. It's the title of the book is Open. Now, what you do is just go to the Amazon website and you see a search feature. There's a big, long gray box if you've never done anything on Amazon before. Put in the title, Open, O-P-E-N, colon.
Can I cut in there? Because my third book, which I'll be reading from, is called My Sweet Aroma. There was a bit of a complication, but the third book, my first book is The Face. That was my first book. My second book is called Open, and the third book is called My Sweet Aroma. We're talking about My Sweet Aroma right now.
Okay, good. Thank you, because that was not clear. You're right. On Amazon, they have it listed as Open My Sweet Aroma. So we're actually talking about two separate books. So they should put in My Sweet Aroma, right?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
By Timothy, Timothy, Green, Green. Click on that, and the book will come up, and you'll see that wonderful antique typewriter with the word Open on the cover. And up in the upper right-hand corner of that representation of the cover, you'll see the words Look Inside. If you'll put your cursor on those two words and just click on them, the book will electronically open, and you'll see, first of all, a listing of all the poems. Timothy, how many poems are in My Sweet Aroma? It's a huge number. How many?
There are, well, there's 191 pages in the book. I'm not sure how many poems there are, but 191 pages.
Wow. The table of contents is just, I was reading all the titles and I thought, wow, because there's so much in the book. You can get it.
Jump in?
Go ahead, sure.
Okay, so this is a recent, I've won the Firebird Book Award winner. So it's the Firebird Awards I've won.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, now they can...
I got an honorary. It was an honorary award.
Hey, an award's an award for your work. That's wonderful. Congratulations. Now, they can buy the book right there on Amazon, but you and I both know that people don't always want to buy from Amazon, whether it's U.S. Amazon or whether it's Europe Amazon. Where else can they find your book? I know that you have a website, so let's give them that website address.
Okay, sure, yeah. It's www.timothygreen.com. So it's all lowercase.
And no spaces.
Also, not just, yeah. It's all lowercase. Timothy Green, timsir.com.
Now, can they find it on the Author House website as well?
Yeah, that's right. The Author House website, yes. Those are my publishers.
Now, let's talk about your website just for a moment. When our listeners go check it out, what will they find? They'll find books. They'll find all the books there, right?
Correct, yeah. There are 6 books on that site.
And can they purchase books straight from the website?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You know, poetry is powerful. Everybody that writes anything is very much invested in their work. I think poetry is particularly because it's so creative and it comes from a different place than I think perhaps fiction or for sure nonfiction. When our listeners become readers and they pick up a copy of My Sweet Aroma and they sit down, they will not read this book cover to cover like they would a romance novel. They'll sit down and they'll start to read the poems, and they may read 1, they may read 2 or 3, but they'll have to stop and think because it's poetry and it requires thinking about it. And this is Christian poetry. And so thinking about what you're saying, what it means to them, because poetry is also very individual, I think is very important. So they'll read the poems and they'll put the book away. Then they'll pick it back up and they'll read more. But eventually, they will come to that very last page and they'll read that very last poem, and then they'll close the back cover, and whether electronically or physically. Timothy, when the reader finishes the book and they close that back cover for the last time, what message, what do you want them to take away from My Sweet Aroma, to take away from your work?
Okay, well, firstly, I hope they don't close the last page and stop reading. It's something that can be enjoyed through the generations, I think. These poems, you can get so much out of them. So I don't think it's not a read through. You know, it's not like finally I know what it means, because we've already discussed that. But I believe that there are some that people might deem are the stronger ones, but earlier when I was reading those poems, I read them in random because I know that they're all good. So I read those randomly.
I can see families having family discussions about the themes and about the poems. I can see families even reading perhaps the poetry, if not at the dinner table, perhaps as a bedtime activity with a kid, maybe a teenage kid. Maybe you have an older sibling that reads poetry to a younger. The younger may not understand it, but I think starting children listening to poetry at a young age is important. And hearing poetry, and especially Christian poetry, talking about it, talking about the themes, talking about what it means to each individual person. Because I agree with you. I think that everyone can take something very different away from each poem. And sometimes when you're talking to someone about it, they've heard something in the poem that you missed. And all of a sudden you have sort of an epiphany and you think, how did I not hear that? Would you agree?
Absolutely. You have done your research, haven't you?
Thank you.
You've probably just gone through every archive.
Well, I told you.
Yeah, you did, yeah.
Yeah, I told you poetry and poets are special to me, so of course I would do my research when I'm going to talk to someone like you. This has just been delightful. It's been such an absolute pleasure to meet you and to talk to you about your work and to hear how that work is created. I always think that creative process is a wonderful, unimaginable thing sometimes. So thank you for being my guest today on Books on Air. It's just been a pleasure.
It has been. Thank you for having me.
Remember, you can find My Sweet Aroma, AROMA, by Timothy Green on Amazon, on his website, and on Author House website. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Suzanne Harris. Please join me for the next Books on Air podcast, because you never, ever know who's going to be here. And you really never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so very much for listening.